Hello boys and girls, my name is Sir Zamin and with me is Miss Riman. Together, we will be taking you on an exciting journey of science in the grade 7 level.
Yes, we'll be looking at integrated science. Now, many have wondered, what is integrated science? Integrated science is a combination of the sciences such as biology, chemistry, physics, and sometimes earth sciences. Integrated science is one of the core subjects that is offered in school, and it is used to answer our everyday issues in science lifestyles.
Excellent, Miss. Thank you for that piece of information. Now, before we proceed in today's lesson, I would like to share with you the resource, the textbook, I should say rather, in which we will be using to deliver the content in the Integrated Science Grade 7 curriculum. The name of that textbook is Science in Daily Life, Book 1. It is easily accessible on the Ministry of Education's website. So download the book so you can follow along as we proceed in our activities.
Today, sir, since we're talking about safety in the lab and we're talking about using our textbooks, what is one of the first things we need to know when we're going to the lab?
Today's objective will be to outline the safety precautions in the laboratory. Now, the first thing that you must do before you enter the lab, that will be you need to ensure you're properly attired, such as having your goggles, lab coat, and a shoe that would cover the outside of your feet.
Do you mind sharing with the students why we need to be covered and why we should have protective gear such as goggles and a covered toe shoe?
The common term, prevention is better than cure. By properly being attired, you're going to ensure that you prevent accidents from occurring and, more importantly, preventing bodily harm.
When we are already dressed and fully in attire, what is the next step we take when entering the lab?
Before we enter the lab, we must seek a teacher's permission. Never enter the lab without a teacher's permission because you may very well distract students that are in the lab that are already doing a practical activity. You may also distract the teacher who may end up creating a spillage.
That is so true. So we will go on to look at the different precautions we can take when we're in the lab. First thing first, sir, let us look at when we're handling flames. What do you think we should do when we're using flames?
Well, first of all, Miss, there are two sources in which we would get flame from in the lab. First, one, I should say, we have the methylated spirit lamp, and secondly, we have a Bunsen burner. So either one of these sources would produce flame for us in the lab when conducting our practical activities.
Okay, boys and girls, do you know why we should take some precautions as to using flames? Now, one of the main reasons why we should be careful when we're using flames is to avoid any injuries to ourselves. Sir, do you mind sharing some precautions when using flames?
Sure, Miss. The first thing we should ensure is that our hair, that Miss has our hair loose down, we should ensure that for females, if your hair is loose, it must be tied. That's to avoid it tangling within the flame. In addition, if you have any loose piece of clothing, it can also be set ablaze. But hey, that's where we have our lab coat.
Definitely. Yeah. Now, we will have protective gears to protect us from flames. But what about things like glassware that we can find in the lab? Glassware such as beakers, funnels,
measuring cylinders,
test tubes. What do we do with that? You know we can get injuries from these. Now, these glassware are made with a special type of glass that is called Pyrex. Pyrex can withstand very, very large amount of heat, but they're very fragile and can be easily broken. Sir, what would happen if one of these are to be, broken in the lab?
Oh, cut. If it happens to be broken, try to avoid not going and actually be the one to clean it up. Call for your teacher. Report the accident, because they cause serious cuts.
We should always report any accident that involves glassware or any spillage inside of our laboratory to our teachers, our supervisors, or instructors.
Also avoid holding glasswares with moist or wet hands. Ensure your hand is dry and well kempt before carrying around a glassware. In addition, ensure you hold your glassware with 2 hands and not 1, because it can easily slip.
Speaking of slipping and spillage, let us move on to when we're handling chemicals. When we talk about chemicals, we are exposed to many different chemicals in the lab. A few of these chemicals we will be discussing today and looking at their symbols and what to look for when we're using them in the lab.
Okay, students, just ensure you have your books out so we can follow along. So the first type of chemical that we will be looking at will be harmful substance. First of all, before I even say that, chemicals are classified. One of those categories is harmful substance. Miss, do you care to elaborate on harmful substance and flammable substance for the students?
Sure. Now, students, harmful substances are those substances, if ingested or swallowed, can cause severe vomiting to our bodies or to ourselves. Now, we can identify a harmful substance by the symbol X. An example of a harmful substance is ammonia. Now, let's move on to flammable substances. When we talk about flammable substances, we're talking about any substance that can be easily ignited, meaning that they can be easily set ablaze or put on fire. Now, we want to avoid any such substances. An example of a substance that is flammable is alcohol or ethanol. Now, the symbol for flammable substance is the one that shows a flame. Let us move on now. Sir Zamin, do you mind explaining toxic?
Sure, miss. And in addition, I'll explain corrosive substances as well for you students.
Sure, sir.
So corrosive substances, they tend to burn skin, clothing, and even tissues. Corrosive substances can even attack metals, right? So a spillage of corrosive substance is very dangerous at the end of the day. So we need to be very cautious when handling these substances. An example of that would be caustic soda. Next, I'll move on to toxic substances. Toxic substances, these are substances that can cause death if swallowed, and even their fumes can be toxic to us if inhaled. Such examples will be hydrochloric acid and carbon monoxide.
Very well, sir. Now, students, I will take you to the final two substances that we have in the lab. We'll be looking at explosive substances. Now, these are any substance that once reacted with water, air, or moisture can explode. I am pretty sure you have seen an explosion before. We have used firecrackers and so on. So these actual substances can explode. Now, an example of an explosive substance is sodium. The symbol for an explosive substance is a bomb or something that is actually going through an explosion. Now, the other substance that we will look at is radioactive substances. Now, radioactive substances are any substance that gives off a harmful ray. Now, for radioactive substances, it can only be touched by the teacher or instructor of that lesson or lab. An example of radioactive substances is uranium. The symbol of a radioactive substance is?
Okay, Ms. Riemann, how do we identify which category they fall under in the lab?
Well, for sure we will have to look at the symbol that they carry and the labels that they have on each of them.
Which brings me to a point, students. Ensure that when you're picking up any chemical in the lab that it is labeled. Never use a chemical that is not labeled, because at the end of the day, chemicals tend to resemble other chemicals. Yes. For example, alcohol may very well resemble water. All right? So be very careful.
Now we would move on. There's some other aspect of a lab that we want to touch today. I know you're sitting at home. Can you look around you and see if there are any electrical outlets? If we're to take a look, you will find some points there. Now, a very important aspect when we're in the lab is to never plug any appliance into an outlet or tamper or play with the switches or outlets found there. Sir, do you mind sharing with the students why we shouldn't do that?
Shock! Right away. It doesn't matter, right? You have to ensure that the device that you're using is not faulty. Please ensure that you inspect the device before even plugging it into an outlet. And students, before using the outlet, ensure you ask your teacher's permission.
Good, sir. That's a good point to take, students. Now, boys and girls, this is another point we want to make to you when you're in the lab. You should never place any equipment or instrument on an uneven surface. Now, why do you think we shouldn't put things on an uneven surface? Take, for example, we're putting a beaker there. What would happen, for example, if we had some liquid in this? We might cause some spillage or some disruption to what we're having there.
Definitely. So therefore, when we're handling anything in the laboratory, we need to be very, very cautious to avoid accidents from occurring.
Accidents and spillage.
Yeah.
For sure. Now, there's another aspect we want to look at. We want to look at using sharp instruments. Now, what are some sharp instruments in the lab?
Needles, pins, razor blades, even scissors. These are considered to be sharp instruments found in the lab. Now, students, when you have these instruments in your hand, ensure you don't horseplay. Never horseplay in the laboratory.
Meaning I should not be swinging
No, you should
this.
not be doing that right now. Miss, kindly put that down.
Or you should not be even cutting and pointing those sharp edges to any of the students around you or your colleagues or your friends in the laboratory. But be cautious and take care when you're handling these equipment and instruments.
Now, miss, despite we are telling these students all of these safety precautions, accidents are inevitable. It may occur to a certain extent, but by taking your precautions, you can minimize that injury. But in the event you do have a slight or minor accident, there are certain things that we can do in the lab. Now we will move on to safety equipment in the lab.
Now, first of all, in every lab, there should be some means of putting out a fire. Now, what do you think are some things we can use to put out a fire, boys and girls? We have, first of all, a fire extinguisher. Do you know how a fire extinguisher works? Now, a fire extinguisher is one that uses carbon dioxide to eliminate oxygen or the flame from burning. Now, we know for a fire to become bigger, it should have three main elements. There should be a fuel, there should be oxygen or air, and heat to make that bigger. So we try to eliminate those things. You should also have what is called a fire bucket. Now, a fire bucket would include sand. You take that sand and you would throw it on the fire to avoid oxygen from reacting with the material. There's also a last aspect you should have in the lab, which is called a fire blanket. A fire blanket is made with materials that do not burn. It can withstand the flames and the fire of any burning material. Moving on, sir, there should also be water for washing.
Yes.
Why do you think we need water for washing? Can we share with the students?
Sure, in the event that there's spillage of chemicals in the eyes, as soon as there's a spillage, you must rush to the closest sink. You must flush your eyes with water for at least a couple minutes just to ensure that it's out. All right? It's to ease up any further damage into your eyes. As well as even if there's a spillage on your hands, you run quickly to the sink, you wash with soap, water, just to get it off as quickly as possible.
Now, there's also another aspect that is found in the lab, and that is your first aid kit. How many of you have seen a first aid kit before? You may notice when you're in the lab, there's a little white box with a cross, a red cross on it. Now, when we look at that, this is called a first aid kit. And it is used to treat very minor injuries. Now, sir, do you mind sharing with the students what are some of these injuries we can treat with this first aid kit?
Okay, students, so if you look at page 13, we can actually go through those minor injuries. We have there the first one, minor bruises, minor cuts, minor wounds, fire burns, any spillage of acid, a fracture, or even a headache.
Very good, sir. Now, what are some of the items you may ask students that are found in this little first aid kit here? Now, there are items such as cotton wool, you may have swabs, you may have methylated spirit, burning lotion, and bandages. There are a few others that we can get into details too. Now, to wrap it up today, sir, do you mind sharing with our students what are some actual lab rules that we have to follow?
Let's start with our don'ts.
Definitely.
Right? Let's start with our
do
don'ts.
that.
So, the first don't will be never enter lab without teacher's permission.
Now, you should also never start any activity without reading the manual or the instructions.
Never turn on gas without teacher's permission. Also, look around to see if any other valves are on before igniting your flame.
You should also never eat or drink in the laboratory.
Never run in and out of the laboratory.
You should never remove anything from the lab. Sometimes it might be something new and strange, but never take anything out of the laboratory.
Never throw solids down the sink.
Never use your fingers to stir or hold things that you should not.
Never put things other than plugs into electrical sockets or operate electrical appliances with wet hands.
Most importantly, never play in the lab.
Very good. So let's go on to what we should always do. And this will wrap up our activity for today, boys and girls. So let's go with the do's in the lab. Always wait for teacher's permission before entering the lab.
You must always report accidents quickly.
Always move carefully when carrying equipment and chemicals.
Now, you must always keep your workstation clean and tidy.
Always clean up spilled liquid quickly.
Always read your labels carefully.
Always make sure you know what to do in an emergency. And lastly,
you must always clean up after your work. So, dear boys and girls, that will be all for today. See you soon and join us for our next lesson on spectacular mixtures.
We're looking forward to see you. This is Sir Zamin and Miss Raman.
Bye-bye.